Somewhere in America right now, a freight train crew is skipping the hotel and bedding down inside the locomotive. Not by choice. The cab hits 85 decibels. It vibrates nonstop. It was built for driving, not sleeping. But a federal clock caps every crew at 12 hours on duty, and when it expires, the train stops wherever it happens to be. A siding in Wyoming. Open prairie. Nowhere near a bed. Relief crews can be 120 miles away, and every hour a train sits idle can cost thousands. What looks like a strange habit is really a system breaking under its own rules. It starts with one ticking clock. The legal clock that dictates every movement on American rails is set by federal law under Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 21103. At its core, the rule is straightforward. A train crew cannot remain on duty for more than 12 consecutive hours. Once those 12 hours are up, the law requires a minimum of 10 consecutive hours off duty before that crew can touch a locomotive control again. These boundaries are monitored and enforced by the Federal Railroad Administration under strict reporting guidelines. Every single minute of activity, from the moment a conductor logs into the terminal computer to the moment they sign out, is tracked. If a crew exceeds their limit by even a few minutes, the railroad is legally required to file an excess service report. Under Title 49 Code of Federal Regulations Section 228.19 within 30 days, exposing the carrier to civil penalties. This 12-hour limit is an absolute ceiling rather than a flexible guideline. In other transportation sectors like trucking, drivers have minor flexibility to reach a safe parking spot. In the railroad industry, no such leeway exists for standard operations. When the 12th hour strikes, the crew's legal authority to operate the train terminates instantly. It does not matter if the train is 5 miles from a major yard, blocking a public road crossing, or sitting on a single track in the middle of a desert. The clock does not negotiate with geography, and the crew cannot choose to keep going just to reach a comfortable destination. Beyond the daily 12-hour limit, the federal framework places broader boundaries on a rail worker's schedule to prevent cumulative exhaustion. A second major restriction is the monthly duty ceiling, which caps a worker's total time at 276 hours. This total includes on-duty time and travel time spent traveling to or from assignments. Federal regulations also mandate extended rest periods at the crew's home terminal. If an employee works 6 consecutive days, the railroad must give them at least 48 consecutive hours off duty. If they work 7 consecutive days, that mandatory rest period increases to 72 consecutive hours. These multi-day rest requirements ensure that workers have a chance to recover from the erratic schedules common in freight operations. These modern rules differ significantly from the early days of American railroading. When Congress first passed the Hours of Service Act in 1907, the law allowed crews to work up to 16 consecutive hours per shift, with minimal protections against cumulative fatigue. Over the next century, regulatory standards slowly tightened. Legislative revisions in 1969 and 1976 lowered the daily ceiling to 12 hours and established the basic 8-hour rest minimum. The most significant modern change came with the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008. This legislation authorized the Federal Railroad Administration to implement the current 276-hour monthly cap and the strict home terminal rest rules. The evolution of these laws has steadily reduced the hours workers can spend on the job, transforming the rail industry's daily schedule into a highly regulated, rigid countdown. On May 12, 2024, a Union Pacific freight train ground to a halt on a remote siding near Wheatland, Wyoming. The train was mechanically sound, the weather was clear, and the tracks ahead were open. Yet the train could not move. The crew had run out of legal working hours under federal law, having logged 78 hours of service within a 14-day period. Because they had exceeded their absolute statutory limit, The engineer and conductor were legally forbidden from operating the locomotive. In a major rail yard, a timed-out crew is a minor scheduling adjustment. In the vast, empty stretches of the American West, it is an operational crisis. The siding near Wheatland sat more than 150 miles from the nearest crew change terminal. There were no roads suitable for transport vans, no hotels within driving distance, and no qualified relief crews within the 30-minute radius required to invoke the federal remote siding exemption. The train was stranded in the middle of nowhere, and the crew had no way to leave. This is the dead train problem. A halted freight train cannot pull onto a shoulder or park in a designated rest area. It sits on the steel rails, occupying a block of track that other trains need to pass. On single-track main lines, which form the backbone of Western freight corridors, a single dead train acts as a physical barrier. It halts opposing traffic, forces dispatchers to hold other trains at distant sidings, and initiates a cascading delay that can disrupt schedules across multiple states. A single timed-out crew quickly becomes a multi-million-dollar network blockage. The Wheatland incident ultimately triggered a Federal Railroad Administration investigation under Form 6180, revealing how easily the strict countdown of safety laws can collide with remote geography. When the 12-hour clock runs out in these isolated territories, the railroad is forced to leave the train exactly where it sits. Without a hotel, a relief van, or a way home, the crew is left with only one viable shelter: the cramped, noisy cab of the locomotive they are no longer allowed to drive. Resolving a stalled train on a remote siding requires a complex logistics chain to locate, verify, and transport a fresh pair of workers to the stranded locomotive. When a crew's 12-hour clock runs out, Operations Control must coordinate a difficult handoff that involves real-time database queries, long-distance road travel, and restrictive geographic bottlenecks. The process begins inside the Regional Dispatch Center, where operators rely on electronic crew management software like CrewMinder. The software must run automated queries to verify that candidates are fully qualified for the specific territory, have completed their mandatory 10 hours of undisturbed off-duty rest, and have not approached their 276-hour monthly service limit. A single mistake in these calculations violates federal safety laws and exposes the carrier to civil penalties, so compliance is critical. Once the system identifies a qualified engineer and conductor, the dispatcher initiates a formal call window. According to data compiled by the Government Accountability Office, it takes an average of 45 minutes just to complete this administrative phase, notify the crew, and dispatch them from their home terminal. From there, the logistical hurdles multiply. Because Class 1 railroad crew bases are spaced far apart across the Western Territory, the relief crew must travel a significant physical distance to reach the train. The average relief travel distance is 120 miles. This journey is typically made in contractor-owned passenger vans, navigating remote highway routes, unpaved service roads, or rugged mountain passes that are highly vulnerable to severe weather. Even under ideal conditions, this travel time means the stranded train sits idle for hours, occupying vital track capacity. When infrastructure is limited, the delay quickly cascades. This systemic vulnerability was demonstrated on October 3, 2022, along BNSF's single-track main line between Miles City, Montana, and Gillette, Wyoming. On that afternoon, heavy coal traffic coincided with a severe dispatch capacity bottleneck. A local dispatcher shortage left only 3 qualified operators on shift to manage a 300-mile territory that normally requires a minimum of 5. When a scheduled crew on this corridor timed out, the dispatch center was forced to hold oncoming trains on double-track sidings to keep the single main line clear. With no relief crew immediately available to move the stalled train, a massive gridlock developed. The bottleneck ultimately trapped 27 freight trains, each averaging 7,200 feet in length. The average delay per train exceeded 4 hours and 12 minutes, with peak delays reaching 6 hours and 45 minutes. This incident reveals why railroad geography acts as a force multiplier for delays. On a single track line, a train waiting for a relief crew is a physical barricade. Dispatchers cannot route other traffic around it. Instead, they must hold opposing trains at distant sidings, freezing movement across multiple states. Furthermore, the railroad's response is inherently reactive. Because operations control often hesitates to dispatch a costly relief crew until a delay is guaranteed, the 12-hour clock has frequently expired before the replacement van leaves the terminal. By the time the fresh crew arrives at the remote siding, the original crew has already spent hours waiting in the stationary cab, and the entire corridor is backed up for miles. When a freight train stops in a remote territory, the operational problem shifts from where the crew has stopped to what kind of rest that location physically allows. Train crews do not sleep inside the loud, vibrating cab of a diesel locomotive by choice. They remain inside the engine because the surrounding infrastructure fails to offer a legal alternative. Under federal law, specifically Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 2106, the quality standards for railroad-provided sleeping quarters are strictly defined. Any designated rest facility must be clean, safe, sanitary, and free from carrier-controlled noise. To make this protection functional, the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 49, Section 228.409, imposes a strict geographic limit. These approved quarters must be located within 1/2 mile of the point where the crew is formally released from duty. This half-mile rule creates an operational barrier. If a train times out on an isolated siding 20 miles from the nearest town, a clean hotel room may exist, but it is legally unusable because it lies far beyond the half-mile boundary. The railroad cannot officially sign the crew off duty at a location that violates federal space standards. Unable to transport them to an approved facility within the legal radius, the carrier uses the stationary cab as a logistical loophole. This makes on-engine rest a common operational default, rather than a preferred, comfortable arrangement. The steel cab becomes a makeshift bedroom, a forced workaround because the physical network offers no other compliant option within the required distance. An idling diesel locomotive is never truly quiet. Inside the steel cab, even while stationary on a remote siding, the engine generates a constant low-frequency hum, measuring between 80 and 90 decibels. When generating power, this noise easily climbs past 95 decibels, creating an environment that contrasts sharply with any standard for quiet, restorative sleep. Along with the relentless noise comes a persistent physical vibration. The metal floor, console, and walls shake with root-mean square acceleration levels between 0.1 and 0.3 G. This low-frequency, whole-body vibration travels directly through the human skeleton, disrupting deep sleep cycles and keeping the nervous system in a state of low-level alarm. The physical layout offers no comfort. This space is designed entirely for active operations, not human recovery. The seats are stiff, fixed, and measure just 20 to 22 inches wide. They lack lumbar support and cannot recline, forcing a worker to drape their body over cold control consoles or curl up on the dirty steel floor just to lie down. Meanwhile, the heating and ventilation units provide poor climate stability. When the locomotive is stopped, temperature swings of 30 degrees Fahrenheit are common, and the ventilation system lacks any dedicated air filtration to remove lingering diesel exhaust. Trying to sleep under these conditions is a physical battle against the machine. Rest taken in these cramped, shaking quarters fails to restore the body, leaving crew members with severe back strain, fragmented sleep, and a heavy, cumulative exhaustion that persists long after they wake up to start their next 12-hour shift. Avoiding a $100 hotel room is only a minor fraction of the railroad's financial math. while lodging and ground transport for a two-person crew typically costs between $270 and $530, leaving an entire freight train sitting on a main line is an exponentially larger threat to the balance sheet. When a train stalls and blocks a corridor, network-level delay costs and shipper contract penalties accumulate rapidly. Industry estimates indicate that train detention fees can range from $1,000 to $5,000 for every hour the tracks are blocked. If a train remains stationary for 6 hours, that single bottleneck can cost up to $30,000. This network pressure forces railroads into a difficult cost trade-off, where keeping freight moving must be prioritized over worker comfort. Transporting a crew to an approved hotel, waiting for their mandatory 10-hour rest period to finish, and bringing them back can take half a day, causing a massive backup of other trains. By avoiding the logistical friction of an off-site release, the carrier protects the broader main line from a cascading traffic collapse across entire states. Leaving the crew inside the stationary locomotive keeps them immediately available on-site, ready to hand over the train the moment a relief crew arrives. The operating economics of modern rail systems reward the fastest workable resolution to a disruption, rather than the most restorative rest environment. In this intense cost structure, on-engine sleep functions as a calculated decision designed to minimize expensive network delays, rather than an accidental system breakdown. Sleeping on a stationary locomotive might satisfy the letter of the law, but it fails to meet the biological requirements of the human body. Rest taken in a vibrating steel cab is not equivalent to normal, restorative sleep. Biological recovery requires cycles of slow-wave, uninterrupted sleep. This level of rest is impossible to achieve when surrounded by 90-decibel engine noise and continuous structural vibration ranging from 0.1 to 0.3 G. The rigid, 22-inch seats force workers to lie on cold steel floors or drape themselves over control consoles. As a result, railroad workers can be legally off-duty and fully compliant with federal rest limits while remaining extremely fatigued. Sleep science shows that the consequences of this compromised rest go far past simple physical discomfort. When a worker wakes up from fragmented sleep, they face a state of mental fog called sleep inertia. This period of grogginess and impaired cognitive function typically lasts 15 to 30 minutes, slowing reaction times and degrading decision-making during the essential moments right after waking. For an engineer suddenly required to operate a train weighing thousands of tons, this temporary deficit is a dangerous safety risk. The body remains in a state of low-level alarm, unable to recover from the physical strain of the shift. Over consecutive days, repeated short sleep sessions cause a cumulative sleep debt and a severe loss of vigilance. This progressive exhaustion leads directly to microsleeps, uncontrollable lapses of attention lasting up to several seconds that can occur without the operator realizing they lost consciousness. In an operating environment, a single microsleep can mean missing an important signal or failing to react to a track obstruction. When a crew is deprived of proper recovery, their ability to process complex visual data and make quick safety decisions drops rapidly. This gap between legal compliance and physiological reality exposes a major tension in modern railroading. The current scheduling systems manage hours, but they do not manage fatigue. By allowing cab sleep to count as valid off-duty rest, the industry prioritizes keeping trains positioned on the tracks over ensuring the people operating them are fully alert. The practice protects the flow of freight and avoids scheduling friction, but it leaves the real cost of sleep deprivation to be paid by the crews in the cab. The conflict between regulatory compliance and physical recovery comes down to a structural gap in how the law defines rest. Under the federal framework, a crew's off-duty clock is supposed to be protected from carrier interruption. Yet, operational demands regularly push these boundaries. When a crew is forced to wait hours inside a stationary locomotive for a transport van, this limbo time is technically classified as neither on-duty nor off-duty. In 2012, the Federal Railroad Administration issued a policy interpretation that ruled if this limbo period intrudes upon a worker's mandatory 10-hour rest window, it constitutes a material disruption. This ruling means the railroad must reset the entire 10-hour rest clock, legally keeping the crew sidelined even longer. While this interpretation protects workers from being called back to work while exhausted, it frequently has the opposite practical effect. Instead of getting the crew to a hotel, the reset clock can trap them inside the locomotive cab even longer, as dispatchers wait for a new relief window to open. This system-level friction is not easily fixed by local or state authorities. In 2018, BNSF Railway and Union Pacific challenged California state laws that attempted to mandate paid meal and rest periods for rail workers. The district court ruled in favor of the railroads, declaring that state-level rest mandates are entirely preempted by the Federal Hours of Service Act, the Federal Railroad Safety Act, and the Adamson Act. This legal preemption means that states cannot enforce higher standards of rest or comfort for railroad employees within their borders. The comprehensive federal rules shield the carriers from local labor laws, leaving workers with no recourse but the federal framework. As a result, the struggle over crew rest remains a structural issue rather than an individual scheduling failure. The law permits railroads to log workers as off-duty while they are physically trapped in a noisy, vibrating steel cab, as long as no safety-critical work is performed. Regulators maintain that the current rules ensure safety, while labor unions argue that these paper-thin definitions of rest ignore the reality of human fatigue. In this system, compliance is measured by the clock, not by the quality of a worker's sleep. For the families of railroaders, the telephone is a constant source of quiet anxiety. In this industry, the end of a shift is never a predictable mark on a calendar, but a moving target dictated by track conditions hundreds of miles away. Because dispatchers can hold trains or order crew changes without warning, family members learn to live in a chronic state of limbo. Milestones, school plays, and family dinners are routinely missed, sacrificed to an operating schedule that never sleeps. Spouses recount the constant dread of the phone ringing at 2 in the morning, knowing it means another sudden, unannounced departure into the night. This instability does far more than strain relationships. It slowly erodes the human body. In 2022, the Federal Railroad Administration surveyed 809 crew members to document their sleep patterns and daily work schedules. The findings revealed a stark disconnect between regulatory compliance and actual human recovery. Even when workers remained strictly within their legal hours of service limits, they reported a persistent, compounding sleep debt. The study confirmed what crews had long experienced. Legal compliance on paper is rarely the same as restorative rest in reality. When sleep is constantly fragmented and unpredictable, the biological cost accumulates over years. Peer-reviewed occupational health research directly connects chronic sleep disruption to severe long-term medical conditions. The constant shifting of circadian rhythms elevates the risk of cardiovascular disease, triggers metabolic imbalances, and contributes to serious mental health challenges like anxiety and clinical depression. The human body is simply not designed to run on a schedule that resets every 12 hours without any regard for day or night. For those inside the cab, the toll is felt in the quiet hours between shifts. Workers describe the sheer exhaustion of returning home, only to find their minds still racing, unable to adjust to the quiet of a normal bedroom after hours of low-frequency engine hum. They find themselves physically present, but emotionally distant, trapped in a cycle of recovery that never quite finishes before the next call window opens. For many, the transition from the vibrating steel of the locomotive to the stillness of home is a jarring process that takes hours, if not days, to resolve. This is the quiet, daily reality of modern railroading. A system where the freight always moves, but the people operating the locomotives are left to pay a heavy personal price. Under Australian Rail Track Corporation regulations, rail operators must fund accredited rest facilities within 30 kilometers of remote crew change points. This system keeps trains moving by building rest into the route itself, rather than leaving crews to improvise. In Canada, the Railway Safety Act mandates that carriers provide dedicated terminal dormitories or trailing sleeper cars for routes exceeding 8 hours. Across the European Union, Directive 2004/49/EC sets standards for certified sleeper cars on trailing carriages, allowing one worker to rest while another operates the train. These international frameworks demonstrate how deliberate network design and targeted regulation can eliminate the need for cab sleeping entirely. On-engine sleep persists because each persists because of physical infrastructure and operational design. Modern rail networks span vast, empty stretches where crew change bases are separated by 150 to 250 miles. Building a dense web of compliant rest stations across these remote territories is economically challenging, leaving long corridors with no legal lodging alternatives within the statutory half-mile limit. At the same time, chronic labor shortages and strict precision-scheduled railroading pressures leave dispatchers with few choices. When a freight train runs out of time on a distant siding, there is often no replacement crew available to send, and keeping the mainline tracks clear remains the overriding priority. The system incentivizes carriers to accept the cab as a temporary shelter because it prevents cascading network delays that cost thousands of dollars per hour in detention fees and contract penalties. Federal regulations accommodate this reality. For smaller regional operators, the Federal Railroad Administration offers narrow waivers, allowing crews to remain on duty for up to 16 hours in a 24-hour window, rather than the standard 12 hours. While these exceptions manage extreme edge cases for short-line carriers, they reveal an industry that relies on adjusting duty limits rather than building physical rest infrastructure. Ultimately, crews sleep in locomotives because the physical network is designed for moving freight, not housing people. The practice continues because the incentives, the geography, and the lack of alternative facilities make the vibrating steel cab the path of least resistance for a system under constant pressure to keep moving. Today, the pressure on our supply chains only intensifies. But when a system treats workers like predictable machine parts, the human element inevitably fractures. Bunking on steel floors is no longer an anomaly. It is the price of keeping America moving. Until we value human rest as much as on-time arrival, the exhausted silence inside these cabs will remain the industry's loudest warning. Join the conversation in the comments below.